The rain pounded against the windows of the tiny Brooklyn apartment, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in Ellie Harper's chest. She sat cross-legged on her worn-out couch, a steaming mug of coffee forgotten on the table, her hazel eyes fixed on the envelope in her hands. It was old, yellowed at the edges, the ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. His handwriting. Ellie hadn't seen or heard from Noah Sullivan in 7 years, not since that humid summer night in Charleston when he'd kissed her under the Spanish moss-draped oaks, promising forever, only to vanish the next morning without a word. She'd spent months, years really, trying to forget him, building a life in New York as a freelance illustrator, convincing herself he was just a ghost from her past. And now, here he was again, slipping back into her world through a letter postmarked from a tiny town in Montana, delivered to her doorstep with no return address. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and the words hit her like a punch to the gut. Ellie, I never stopped loving you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to come to Hollow Creek. There's something here you need to see, something I can't explain in words. Please. I'll be waiting at the old mill every night until you do. Noah. She dropped the letter, her mind racing. Hollow Creek? She'd never heard of it. And what could possibly be so important that he'd break 7 years of silence? Anger flared first. He didn't get to waltz back into her life like this, not after leaving her shattered. But then came the curiosity, sharp and insistent, tugging at her like a fishhook. What was he hiding? And why now? Against her better judgment, Ellie Googled Hollow Creek. It was a speck on the map, a fading coal town in Montana with a population barely scraping 300. No major airports nearby, no reason anyone would ever go there, unless they were running from something or to something. She stared at the screen, her heart thudding. She could ignore it, toss the letter in the trash, and keep living her safe, predictable life. Or she could go. 3 days later, Ellie was on a plane to Bozeman. Then, in a rental car, winding through the rugged Montana landscape. The letter tucked into her bag like a ticking time bomb. The old mill loomed into view as dusk settled over Hollow Creek, a crumbling relic of brick and rusted metal surrounded by overgrown weeds. She parked, her breath catching as she saw a figure standing in the shadows near the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, hands stuffed in the pockets of a leather jacket. Noah. He turned as she approached, and time seemed to stutter. He looked older, lines etched around his blue eyes, a faint scar tracing his jaw. But it was him, the boy who'd stolen her heart at 22 and broken it at 23. His gaze softened when he saw her, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "You came," he said, his voice rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "Don't flatter yourself," she snapped, crossing her arms. "I'm here for answers, not you." He nodded, unsurprised, and gestured toward the mill. "It's inside. Follow me." Against the screaming protests of her common sense, Ellie followed. The air inside was damp and heavy, smelling of mildew and decay. Noah led her to a rickety staircase that descended into a basement, lit only by a flickering lantern he carried. Her pulse quickened. What was this? Some kind of trap? But then he stopped, pointing to a wooden chest in the corner, its lid propped open. Inside were dozens of letters, envelopes, notebooks, loose pages, all addressed to her in Noah's handwriting. She knelt, picking one up, her breath hitching as she read the date. August 12th, 2018, a month after he'd disappeared. I wrote to you every day, he said quietly, standing a few feet back. For years, I never sent them because I couldn't. Not after what I did. She whirled on him, clutching the letter. What you did, you left me, Noah. No note, no call, nothing. I thought you were dead, or worse, that I'd meant nothing to you. You meant everything, he said, his voice breaking. That's why I had to go. He stepped closer, and she saw the pain in his eyes, raw and unguarded. That night in Charleston, I didn't just leave you, Ellie. I left because I found out something about my family, about me, that I couldn't drag you into. My father wasn't who he said he was. He was involved in some bad stuff. Organized crime, money laundering. When he died, he left me a mess I didn't ask for. People came after me, dangerous people. If I'd stayed, they'd have come after you too. Ellie's anger faltered, replaced by a cold knot of confusion. So you just ran? You didn't trust me enough to tell me? I trusted you, he said fiercely. I didn't trust myself to keep you safe. I spent years cleaning it up, paying off debts, cutting ties, hiding out here. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. She looked down at the chest, the letters spilling out like pieces of a life she'd never known. One caught her eye, a sketch taped to a page. It was her, laughing under those Charleston oaks, drawn in the careful lines she'd once taught him. Her throat tightened. Why now? She whispered. Why bring me here? Because it's over, he said. The last of them, the people hunting me, they're gone. I'm free, and I couldn't live another day without you knowing the truth, without asking if there's any chance you could forgive me. Ellie's heart waged a war between the past and the present. She wanted to hate him, to walk away and leave him with his ghosts. But as she looked at him, really looked, she saw the boy she'd loved, buried under years of regret. And then there were the letters, a silent testament to a love he'd never let go of, even when she had. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said finally, her voice trembling. Not yet, but I'm here. That's something. Noah exhaled, a shaky breath that sounded like hope. That's more than I deserve. They stood there in the dim light, the weight of 7 lost years between them, and yet for the first time, a thread of possibility too. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the mill, but down here, it was just the two of them, and a chest full of secrets waiting to be unraveled.